All right, we've got Dave Mathisen back, Star Myth investigator, for the third time. I think he's been here twice before. And all the world's traditions have been built around the stars, the planets, the sun and moon, and David's been investigating them for quite a while. He's written a couple of huge books, big coffee table book that we have here in the studio. And we're going to try a video presentation. It'll be brilliant.
This is our first crack at this, so
this
don't be... We've
video.
actually had a couple cracks at it, but hopefully this is the first one that works.
Yeah. Yeah, so welcome back, David. Thanks for doing this with us.
Thanks for having me, Graham and Darren. I feel like I'm right in the igloo. This is fantastic.
Yeah, we've been both skywatching a little bit lately as well for different reasons, and we want to ask you some personal questions about that kind of stuff as well.
Excellent. Yeah. So, what did you mention something? Oh, yeah, I've been here twice before. I put it on that Grimerica passport. Hopefully people can see the...
oh, yeah, those are the actual
in
episodes.
a little window. So I was on show 99 in 2015 in January, and then the previous time to this one was show 142 in November of 15. So it's been almost exactly 2 years.
Oh, wow. Since the last one?
Yeah, isn't that
Holy
crazy?
Holy shit, that's crazy.
You guys have been cranking out a lot of interviews.
Yep.
Jeez.
Yeah, it's been going good.
Was it
Can you
that
believe this
long
was
ago?
2 years ago?
Yeah, I was 99, and what number are you guys up to?
245, I think.
It'll be 245 this week. Yeah.
I know Darren stamped the last one wrong, so people are
Again?
confused. Yeah.
Did I do it wrong again?
Yeah, he used the same stamp from the week before.
Oops. And the iTunes count is off, too.
So, yeah, we're up there.
Yeah.
Plus, we got about 10 in the black budget. So, yeah, it's going pretty good.
Nice. Yeah, well, thanks for having me back. And one of the things that kind of, I'll let you guys lead the questions wherever you want, but one of the things that kind of precipitated it was this was me going to the eclipse, the solar eclipse. Can you see that on the screen?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just setting it. I set it up so that there's a double feed so that we have the ability to switch back and forth between having us on the side and not having us on the side.
So if you want to zoom into his presentation, you can just flip feeds like that. That's great.
I can do that.
That's
I
great.
have
Yeah,
to do
that's
it
what I said.
manually, so when he starts showing stuff that's a little more in-depth, I have the ability to just click and click. So
Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's the eclipse path. I was in there someplace.
Yeah, you were. So that's me going. I started way below where the bottom of the screen is, and you started way above the top of the screen. But zooming in, unfortunately the resolution on my little photo isn't that great. But that says Long Creek right above the purple circle. I was inside that purple circle, and Darren was right at Long Creek, like less than 5 miles away.
Yeah, I was literally probably to the left of Long Creek by about an inch. Half an inch even, down at the end of County Road 10. I think it was 10.
And you guys didn't know you were that close to each other.
No, and you know what? I went to put Dave's phone number in my phone today, and I had it even. So it was literally a phone call away, and he would have been, oh, yeah, I'm just up the road.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was funny. I was actually listening to a podcast on the way out. So I didn't hit a lot of traffic until I was coming out. So I was listening to one of you guys' podcasts, and then it was the one about the eclipse, and the guest asked Darren. Darren said, "Oh, I'm going," and the guest asked Darren and said, he said, I'm going to the east side of Oregon, right next to John Day," and I'm like, "You got to be kidding me!"
Yeah, too bad you didn't listen to it before.
Anyway,
so was the eclipse good? Was it more than you expected, or what was your feeling after that?
yeah, I thought it was indescribable. I thought it was really amazing. I'd read a lot about what a solar eclipse is like, and I'd never seen one in person. And I thought it was like, it's indescribable, really. I thought it's like the sun was suddenly replaced by a monster octopus in the sky, and you couldn't take your eyes off of it.
Oh, it's the most amazing thing ever. I think I met up with Ephraim shortly after on the coast of Oregon, and he was like, he's like, everyone's asking me what it looked like, and he's like, well, you missed it, man. He's like, you either seen it or you missed it. And he's like, if you didn't see it, you missed it, because no pictures or videos or words that I can tell you are going to say what it was like.
That's right. And you know what? I kind of felt like it's like when in Frodo in the Lord of the Rings puts on the ring, and all of a sudden the whole world changes, and you get this like rushing sound, and everything's like. That's what it felt like to me when it was so sudden how it transitioned from being a partial to a total. And then it was like you're staring at it and you couldn't take your eyes off it. But anyway, I don't want to go, that's been talked about a lot in the intervening months, but we can come back to how that ties in maybe to some of the myths later on, but I didn't want to focus in on that too much at the beginning because we got a lot of ground to cover. So absolutely,
next time we will make sure we meet up. It's in the cards.
Yeah.
It'll happen.
Yeah. So I thought that was it's not exactly a synchronicity because we were both planning. Where's a good route? Where I've got east to west lateral. So we were both using the same kind of planning mentality, but we happened to end up within 5 miles of each other from.
Something about great minds or some shit.
Exactly.
Like someone said something someday.
So
we don't synchronicity.
So we don't have to get into this now, but before you go, I do want to know. Like I'm going to be out looking at the stars this weekend, and we were talking about having you come on a little bit more often to give us like what to watch out for in the night sky. And then Darren's been going out a little bit more star watching as well. So, but before we do let you go, I do want to get into if there's anything going on coming up.
Yeah, no, great. And I'll say that watching the stars, just real quick, so I don't forget to say this later, is if you're able to get outside and do it, I mean, some people may not be physically able to do it, but if you can, it's free. And it's kind of like going to a bar in a new town and you go there and you're a total stranger. But if you go back every night or you go back every week, pretty soon you start to go, oh, hey, that guy always sits right there. And then after a little while, you start to know, oh, yeah, wait, Joe's not in his normal spot. And then after a while, they start to become your friends. And then, so if you just kind of go to that bar every week or that pub, if you go out every night and kind of walk around and look at the stars, at first you'll feel like a stranger in a new town. But after a while, they'll become your close buddies or friends, like familiar friends anyway.
So I saw something the other night. I might as well ask now before we get into the video part of it. When I was out the other night with a group of people, we saw Pleiades rise on the horizon, and I've never seen that before. I didn't even know it was a thing or if it would be a thing. But a guy at the edge of our group, and I mean, I don't want to get into this for too long because people have heard me talk about it already. But he was like, "What is that? What is that on the horizon?" And my initial thought was it's the Pleiades, but then the more I looked at it, and you know how the Pleiades is, it's very hard to focus on. It feels like it dims and fades and comes in and out. And I saw this blue and green amorphous blob of what I thought was like just this blob of energy. And everybody was seeing a variation of that sort of bluey green thing. And I don't know if it was because of the northern lights or smoke on the horizon or when was this, August or July?
It was pretty smoky.
It was in the summer, so I mean, it could have been atmospheric, whatever. But I also did hear that the Pleiadians' colors are blue and green that people talk about. But anyways, it was a fucking crazy sight. And until it started to rise a little bit more, you couldn't tell it was Pleiades. It just looked like this weird amorphous blob. And then as it came higher, it was less distinct and then more like just a constellation. But I wondered if you'd ever heard of anything in regards to the rising of that.
So yeah, the Pleiades are super important around the world. They're really mythologically important, but and they are rising right now. Actually, now they're starting to be a little higher in the sky when the sun goes down, but because they continue to progress across the sky. So I've never seen any blue or green amorphous colors with the Pleiades. They're like, to me, they're a beautiful cluster. But to me, they are almost like a miniature Big Dipper, the shape of the brightest stars in the Pleiades. But they're a fantastic, beautiful, I love the Pleiades. But no, I've never seen anything like that. That's probably because you're doing your CSETI meditation.
That's right. But I don't think that could affect that. I mean, what would that be? Like, why would we see that thing? Like, well, is it partly the northern lights or some sort of atmospheric trickery, or like what would that be?
Yeah, I don't know.
Because it wasn't only me. I mean, it was every like I saw what I saw, but everybody was seeing something like that. Like I got up and ran. I got up and it was so profound for me. I got up and ran like 20 feet over, away from the group, like looking at it.
Yeah, no, I don't know. I don't know.
And the other thing I loved about it is the new moon. Like there's a big difference between, when we were out last weekend, Darren, and there was like it was almost a full moon. It really is different on how dark the night sky is and how much of the other stars shine.
Yeah, it really does put a damper on things. It was actually for a while there on the Friday night, the moon was clouded out, so you could see the stars, and now because it was dark before the moon came up because that mountain was there.
Yeah.
And, it's too bad because if it would have been, it'd be nice to be out there in a new moon. I went out, though, down by Pritis a couple weeks ago, and it was not a new moon. It was like half a moon. And it wasn't too bad. You could just and it was out, there was not a cloud in the sky. And it was just you just kind of look away from the moon, and you could still see, once your eyes adjusted, you could still see a lot, but you couldn't see the Milky Way, and it was right there, and you couldn't tell. You'd never tell the Milky Way was there. But, I'd forgotten, because it was the first time I had gone and watched the sky in a long time. And I had forgotten how many things you see moving, and we saw a couple shooting stars, and, it was great. And we were only there, an hour. The amount of stuff you could see in an hour, hour and a half is just amazing. And I mean, I don't think anything was anomalous, but it was still great. The kids loved it.
Yeah, no, definitely great if you can get it to a dark area, a little bit away from the haze of light that comes from a town. But the moon definitely plays a big role. But what happens is the sun is always overtaking the moon, or that's one way of thinking about it. There's different ways you can conceptualize it, but when the first new moon is rising, still great stargazing, but then the moon will get progressively bigger and bigger towards midnight, but the moon is always rising later and later. So after the full moon, which really does drown out the stars, what happens is then the moon will start rising later and later. So it depends on if you're watching kind of the prime time hours, which is after sundown up to midnight, then the moon will be in the way but it'll start rising later and later, like at 2 a.m., 3 a.m., and it'll start getting smaller and smaller again as it gets towards rising with the sunrise. And so after that full moon, it starts to come up later. Even though it's a big moon, you can still get some stargazing in before it comes up. Anyway, all this stuff is actually talked about on my blog, which is now I'm almost at 1,000 posts, and they're 100% searchable. So if you go to my blog, or if your audience community of Grimerica wants to go to my blog, you can search for moon phases, and it explains why they happen or what's going on. And
what's the URL again?
So if you go to Star Myth World, that's my main website, Star Myth World, and that's got the blog. And then my blog is also called Mathisen Corollary, and that's on Blogger, which has a slightly, that's the Google search, so that's a really good search. But I keep it running on both places, on Mathisen Corollary and on Star Myth World, starmythworld.com. And if anyone just searches for my last name, Mathisen, and stars, they'll get a link that takes them somewhere that'll get them to Star Myth World. So the blog's on Star Myth World, fully searchable there, and fully searchable on Mathisen Corollary blog.
And so the books are literal encyclopedias.
Yeah. So, David, are you saying that the moon, when the moon is, let's say we're talking about a full moon, when it's rising, does the size of it change depending on
waxing, isn't it? Waxing.
The season and like what you were saying, like how it ends up being? Because I saw it over the city the other night, and it was just massive as it was rising.
Yeah, when it's close to the horizon, like the sun, when it's close to the horizon, it looks enormous. And people say, or scientists say, that's some kind of our perception makes it look that big, because if you take a picture of it, it doesn't look any bigger than at any other time. Which
you know what
weird.
I heard? If you know what I was always told is if you flip yourself upside down and look between your legs, it'll look the normal size.
So a moon under a ballscape is normal.
What? Oh, ballscape? I'm good at nutscaping.
Oh, nutscape, sorry. I can't even get the lingo right.
Are you guys ready to talk about the myths?
Yeah, let's jump into it. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, but no, we can definitely do the skies over Grimerica or stars over Grimerica if you want me to come on every 2 weeks and say what's coming up. Like right now, what stars are up there and what constellations and what myths they might relate to. So,
well, what about that? What about that comet that's coming close by, within like anywhere between like 4,800 kilometers to 170,000 or some sort of crazy thing? Are we able to see that in the night sky?
yeah, I don't know, man. I'm not prepared to answer that. I'm talking about the stars and the myths right now.
Okay.
I think it might be a meteor that.
Yeah, the meteor.
We're getting told of these meteors that are coming really close. Those are pretty hard to see, I think, without knowing exactly what you're looking for and having some high power mag.
Okay.
I mean, we hope they're far enough to be hard enough to see.
Yeah,
I like how they can be off 100,000 kilometers in the farther away direction. It's like, well, what if you're off
no
like
closer than
what if you're off
4,800?
like 5,000 in the closer direction?
Yeah.
But yeah, we're ready to roll. Let's get into some star myths.
All right, right on. So, so I've got the presentation going here, but I wanted to say, I'm really excited to be talking about this stuff. It is talking about sacred things. So I don't want to get too, now I'm live on a feed. So if I say something stupid or objectionable, I'm only human. But the myths themselves are awesome. And these are the sacred traditions that were given around the world. So I'm going to be getting into them, and I think they're doing something really incredible, but they're speaking to us in a celestial language, a different language than what we're often told that they're speaking. They're not speaking, well, I'll present evidence and people can decide what they're saying for themselves, but my thesis is that the myths around the world are all speaking this common celestial language, and that it's a common language, which means somehow this connects all people. It's the same language on the myths in Australia or the sacred stories in Australia, Africa, ancient Greece, the Americas, the Bible, ancient China, ancient Japan, ancient India, Norse mythology can all be shown to be using the same language, speaking the same language. So that, opens up all kinds of questions about where did all this come from. But it should unite us, instead of the Bible is often taught as, well, this is right and everything else is pagan, but they're actually all part of the same family. So that's the intro. I just wanted to say I'm talking about sacred things that some people hold very, it's a big part of some people's lives. So if you're, easily upset about it or don't want to get into that, I don't want to step on it. If it's working for you the way you're believing it, I don't want to step on anyone's toes, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, so I wanted to start actually, I've been on your show a couple of times and spoken a little bit about it, but I wanted to talk about, can you see the screen over there, the picture of, anyone know what that myth is? Audience?
That is the four horses of the apocalypse.
Well, it could be related. This is it's from Greek mythology. Yeah, he definitely has a team of four horses. This is from a beautiful collection of myths by Ingrid and Edgar Perrin Dallaire, that I grew up with their books on the Norse myths and the Greek myths. But this is a depiction of the abduction of Persephone. Have you ever heard of that before?
I've heard of her.
Is Persephone? No, yeah, I've heard of Persephone, but I haven't heard of the myth. Isn't she? Is she in the Is she in the Troy movie?
I haven't actually seen it.
Okay.
I haven't actually seen it. I just know, a little bit about it. But I've definitely studied the Iliad a lot. Anyway, I'm telling you all the things I don't know. All your questions are too hard for me already, guys. So the myth is that the god of the underworld from Greek mythology, you guys know who that is?
Hades.
Right. You're actually not supposed to say his name. It's like dangerous to say his name. So a lot of times they called him Pluton, or the god of the wealth of the underworld, which becomes Pluto in Roman myth. Like all the Greek gods have a Roman name. Anyway, he abducts Persephone and takes her down to the underworld. And her mother, Demeter, is the goddess of all things that grow on the earth, especially like corn and grain. And she refuses to let anything grow until she finds her daughter. So a lot of times, the reason I started off with this one is, A, I haven't talked about it on too many other podcasts. B, I think it opens up a really good window to how these myths track with the stars. And C, a lot of times, if you go to a university professor and say, the myths are all based on the stars. I heard this guy on Grimerica talking about Persephone. He might say, oh, yeah, that's because in primitive times when they relied on, the seasons of the year, they had to make something up for why it was winter 6 months out of the year or part of the year. And that's because Persephone was taken down to the underworld. And they're just trying to explain that. And then when she finally comes back, then we have spring and summer, and everything grows again. And that's what they were doing with these ancient myths, and that's where the myths come from. And I think that by the end of this talk, hopefully, by all these examples, you'll see these myths didn't grow up that way because they're the same all over the world. They're speaking the same language, and they're actually talking about, I think, really profound stuff that you guys get into with your guests all the time, like the invisible world, paranormal, the existence of lucid dreaming or shamanism. They're explaining the invisible universe and our invisible world that's inside. Each one of us has this internal world. So we'll get into that. But I'll just tell you the story real quick. So a lot of times in these Greek myths, you guys know that Zeus is always going and having affairs with mortal women.
That's right.
Yeah. So a lot of times there's a lot of the myths, a lot of us grow up loving the myths, but then as a child, but then when we read kind of the unadulterated myths, we're like, oh my goodness, that's horrible. What is this? That's really violent, or that's really, it's because I believe they're based on the stars. They're not talking about literal things. So anyway, Zeus helped. Hades really wanted to abduct Persephone. Zeus helped by covering the sky with a dark cloud. You can see up there a dark cloud to blot out the sun, so the sun wouldn't know what happened. The sun was, the sun god. And Hades abducts Persephone, takes her to the underworld, and then Demeter, her mother, is looking all over the earth. Where's my daughter? And she finds a young shepherd or a swineherd who's herding his pigs, and his pigs fell into the underworld too. You can see him in that picture. And he saw what happened. He's the only guy who saw what happened. And Demeter finds him, his name is Triptolemus, and says, hey, what happened? And he said, well, the sun was blotted out by a dark storm cloud. And then I saw, the earth open up. My pigs fell in there. I saw the chariot of the god of the underworld, and that was it. And so that's how Demeter knew that Zeus must have had a part in it. And she storms up to the Mount Olympus and says, hey, Zeus, I know you were part of this abduction, and I won't let anything grow on the earth unless my daughter comes back. And then all the gods are like, well, that means everything will die if nothing grows on the earth, and all the humans won't be able to give sacrifices to us. Okay, I'll go talk to Hades, and he has to give her up. So Hades is going to give Persephone up, but she ate something in the underworld. She ate some seeds of a pomegranate, and that's why she has to... When Hades finds that out, the gardener says, oh, she can leave, but she ate something while she was down here. And if you eat something in the underworld, you have to stay. So in order to let things grow on the earth, she gets to go back for spring and summer, but then she has to go back to the underworld for 1 month for each seed that she ate out of the pomegranate. And the myth has different versions. Sometimes it's 3, sometimes it's 4. So that's the background. You guys heard any of that before?
A little
Don't
bit.
eat food
A little
in the
bit.
underworld?
Yeah, I definitely heard don't eat food in the underworld or the fairy realm or...
Right. So this is around the world. So we'll tie in later on if we have some time. There's some Native American sacred stories where you don't eat things in the underworld, and there's very similar things that tie in with the stars to show that this is the same system around the world. But let me just show you what I'm talking about with. This is the constellation Ophiuchus. It's a little bit of a difficult one to see if you don't know. Can you see it on your screen? Can you make it big enough for people at home?
Yep. Absolutely. We got a full screen. This is working perfectly.
Great, right on. So he is right next to the Milky Way. So as Darren, you mentioned a little earlier, the Milky Way right now, the brightest part of the Milky Way is that bright part right by the foot of Ophiuchus. He almost looks like a tombstone, or the body of Ophiuchus. The name Ophiuchus means the serpent holder or the serpent handler. You can see how it looks like he's holding two serpents there.
It's like a rocket man.
Yeah, he's very distinctive shape. And this is, you can spot, he's very huge in the sky, but he's right by the Milky Way. And sometimes the Milky Way is like the passage to the underworld, or it's like smoke rising up from the underworld. In the book of Revelation, in chapter 9, they talk about opening the keys to the underworld, the bottomless pit, and the smoke rising up, and that's the Milky Way. They talk about scorpion men, and they talk about centaurs, and that's the two constellations on either side. I haven't drawn them in, but it's Sagittarius and Scorpio on either side of that bright part. So this is the gates of the underworld. It's also the god of the underworld. And let me see. Can you see my my mouse here? Let me see.
Yep.
Okay, so this part right here of the Ophiuchus is sometimes the god of the underworld carries a noose. Like in ancient India, the god of, or in modern India, the Hindu god of the underworld, his name is Yama, and he has a noose which he snares souls with. And when Yama catches you in his noose, you're going down to the underworld. This is the same figure plays the role of the god of the underworld. So I'm going to argue that this is Hades, who's going to abduct Persephone. So let me continue on here. This is, now I've shown, here's the Milky Way still over here. Underneath the feet of Hades, or the constellation Ophiuchus, is Scorpio. I would argue that Scorpio plays the role of the three-headed dog of the underworld, Cerberus or Kerberos. We won't get into that too much because it doesn't figure in this story. People might say, what? That doesn't look like a dog. But actually, Scorpio has many heads. Sometimes it's envisioned as having 3 heads, sometimes 7, sometimes 8. Like when Hercules fights the Hydra, Scorpio has 9 heads. Right now, everybody at home might be going, wait, I don't really see this, but just bear with me a minute. And this is the constellation Virgo, extremely important constellation Virgo. She actually looks like she's lying on her back, and she's sinking towards the west because the sky is all the stars rotate towards the west, just like the sun rises in the east, goes towards the west. And I believe that is Persephone when she's abducted by Hades, and I'll show you why. Because right above Persephone, so I forgot to mention one important detail from this drawing. Persephone was gathering flowers. You can see in the story she's gathering flowers. This is an artist's depiction, but we have ancient sources talking about, and her bouquet of flowers like flies up in the air when she's grabbed by Hades and pulled down into the underworld. And that right there is a very faint but beautiful constellation called Coma Berenices. It sometimes plays the role of a torch. That is the flowers, of the bouquet of flowers, I would argue, flying up in the air as Persephone is dragged down into the underworld. So I'll just pause and take a breath there and let you guys, is any of this?
So I assume and that's happening when winter's coming, if you're in that hemisphere.
Right. So that's a great question. So this is pointing towards a certain part of the year. So that's a great lead into why would the myths be doing all this? So I want to hold that thought, because what I would argue is it is talking about a certain time of year, but this is like a big code that is talking about certain aspects of our life. These myths are not really about someone else. These myths are about you. You underwent this myth. This myth is about our soul coming down into the physical body, and then what are we doing down here in this physical world? Well, at first we get all tangled up in the physical world, but we have to realize actually there's an invisible aspect, or there's a spiritual aspect, or there's a invisible nature, and we have to start getting back in touch with that. So this whole, the ancient myths are talking about these profound things that actually apply to our daily life. It has to do with all kinds of things like meditating or yoga, or just not panicking if you're in a dangerous situation. It has to do with all these profound things. Like if you think of like the stereotype of a kung fu master in a movie, he's really in control. He's never panicking because he's this enlightened being. Well, in the myths, there's people who are pretty well integrated with their higher self, like Odysseus is a good example of that, or King Solomon. He's really wise. And then there's examples of characters who are really completely out of touch with the spiritual world, like Samson is kind of like an unguided missile, and he's always all over the place. Or King Midas, he's always making the wrong choice. So they're talking about how to become more integrated with like the way we really want to be, like with our higher self. Anyway, that's a great question that you asked. And right now I'm talking about it without laying the groundwork for it a little bit, but that's a little bit of a hint as to where we're going, maybe. Does that make sense so far? So let me just show you some more evidence that I believe this myth is talking about this part of the sky. And yes, it lines up with a certain part of the zodiac wheel that lines up with a certain part of the year, Darren. So really good. But it's not exactly just the coming of winter. That's what the reason I started off with this myth, because it's like that's what they'll tell you if you go to a comparative religion course in the university. They'll say, oh, yeah, this is just about, not just. Those people were in ancient times deeply connected to the seasons. And so they were embodying that. And I would say, yes, they're talking about those things, but they're also talking about the invisible realm, not just the physical realm. So let me continue on because right now people are probably saying, oh, yeah, I maybe see that. Let's continue and I'll show you some more. So there's the flowers being thrown up in the air. Here's some sculpture of Hades or Pluto. Can you see those?
Yep.
And these are from like the 1500s and the 1600s, but it's really interesting. Notice he's not carrying a trident. He's carrying this two-pronged scepter. And you can even go back to ancient Greek pottery. I use these because the trident or the scepter is a little bigger and it's easier to see that it's two-pronged. But it's different from the one that Neptune or Poseidon carries, who carries a trident. And that's because it's based on this constellation. You can see in ancient India, that becomes a noose. In ancient Greece, it's a two-pronged trident. That's what he's holding. So Ophiuchus characters, once you start to learn the distinctive features of a constellation, Ophiuchus characters sometimes they'll be male, sometimes they'll be female. It's like these constellations are like put on different costumes. So it's like you're watching a movie and you're like, wait a minute, I've seen that actor before. Where was she? She was in, oh, I know. Oh, she looks totally different. She's even speaking with a different accent. So the same constellation will sometimes be a male character, sometimes be a female character. But Ophiuchus will often have a spear. You can see a spear will often be a really important part of their description, or sometimes two spears. Like in the Iliad, Hector is sometimes described as going to battle with two spears. That's because he lines up with Ophiuchus. I argue that he lines up with Ophiuchus, and there's a lot of evidence to support that. So I'll give you a little bit more. So this is actually from the Iliad. I don't know if this was in the Iliad movie. I would guess that it is. Darren, do you know what part of the Iliad this is? Is dragging a corpse behind a chariot.
That's when Hector gets killed by Achilles.
Right. So Hector gets slain by Achilles.
No.
Brad Pitt. Yeah. Good call. Darren's right on it.
I know my Greek mythology pretty good, especially the stuff they've made movies about.
So I'm going to zoom in a little bit more. So obviously this is a round narrow vase, so the picture goes around the corner, but you can see Hector is being dragged in the dust, and Achilles is riding in the chariot. It's interesting. I wanted to show you this interesting figure riding right behind Achilles. Greek scholars will tell you that this may be a depiction of the spirit of Patroclus. That was like Achilles' best friend, or some people say his lover. Either way, Achilles gets angry in the Iliad. He goes and storms off, and he won't fight. And so the Greeks, without their best fighter, are getting beaten back. Finally, Patroclus puts on Achilles' armor to try and fool the Trojans into thinking Achilles is back, and he gets killed. And when he gets killed, that's when Achilles is finally like, okay, you killed Patroclus, that's it. And he goes and starts attacking the Trojans again. Wow. So in some Greek scholars will tell you this is the spirit of the departed Patroclus. Elements of the scene. We've got horses, they're around the corner, but they're horses attached to the chariot. We've got Achilles kind of crouching here. We've got the body of Hector splayed out behind. And we've got this interesting figure. Look at his deep knee bend. Look at the way his feet are. I'll tell you, you won't hear this in any art history classes that I know of, but that is because this is depicting a celestial scene, and there's a distinctive constellation that has his legs just like this, right behind a charioteer, or a constellation that plays a charioteer. And here we go. So right above Ophiuchus is this constellation right here. You see the deep knee bend on one leg?
Oh, yeah.
This is the constellation. Anyone want to take a guess? He's the constellation carrying the most powerful weapon of any of the constellations of the sky. So this will usually play the god or the hero or the mythical figure. It sometimes plays a female figure, but often it will play a powerful male figure, often with a square beard, because look at the head on this constellation, very square. So a square-bearded hero from Greek mythology who carries a club-like, powerful club, very powerful, menacing figure. Who do you think that might be?
Thor?
It is Thor. It is Thor. 100 points for Graham. But that's in Norse mythology. So the character with the thunderbolt weapon in Greek myth would be Zeus. So that plays Zeus. And how about a hero with the most powerful weapon? Come on, Graham, keep up here. I'm just kidding. You were right. It is Thor in the Norse myths. It's Hercules.
Oh,
so this
right.
constellation,
I knew that.
But
too.
They're all related, and they're the same constellation. And in ancient India, there's the Bhagavad Gita and the Mahabharata, and you can look online. There's YouTube videos of the Mahabharata of like the Iliad. They've done lots of full-length, like epic, in India, portrayals of the Mahabharata. And one of the 5 hero brothers, the most powerful one, his name is Beam. He corresponds to Hercules. He carries this huge mace.
And that's
around.
him too there. That's that character, that star constellation you're talking about is representing all these massive heroes.
That's what I'm trying to explain, is that these characters, there's not that many constellations, but they'll put on different roles. They'll show up. It's as if we have, 20 Hollywood actors, and they have to cover all the movies that ever come out. So Keanu Reeves will always play a certain character in a certain type of a character. And I don't know, Angelina Jolie will always play, it's like, well, we only have these many actors and actresses, or they're all called actors, sorry. But we've got to make them, all the different myths will use these celestial figures because it ties into this code that Darren was asking, well, does it tie into this part of the year? Yes, but that part of the year also represents things about our own spiritual progress too. So anyway, not to jump ahead of myself, that figure with the winged figure dragging a corpse there, this is actually Hector right here, being dragged. I'll argue in a minute. In the Iliad, it actually says the dust comes rising up from the ground, from the hair of Hector as he's being dragged. His hair is dragging in the dust. It raises up a great cloud of dust. There's the Milky Way. Okay. Where's the chariot? Let me pull it in for you. Right in front, this constellation is called Boötes. You see how he's crouching down? And this is, of course, you guys can see it very nicely up there in the north.
Orion, Big Dipper.
Big Dipper. This is the Big Dipper. So this is the chariot. This is the charioteer. In many myths, we'll have a charioteer. This is his team of horses. I know it doesn't look necessarily like a team of horses, but how many horses are there? 1, 2, 3, 4. These are the reins. This is the charioteer. This is Achilles dragging Hector. You may have him. This may connect down to Hector. This is that scene of Achilles dragging Hector is depicting that part of the sky. That's why the ancient artists put this figure right here with his legs like that, so you know what constellation he's talking about. And instead of showing a big club, this club can also be a wing. Okay, you can envision that club as a club or as a wing. So sometimes if you go back to Renaissance artwork, I can pull one up for you, but go back to Renaissance artwork and look at the angel Gabriel announcing to Mary in the Annunciation. He'll always be down on one knee, deep knee bend, arching wing. This is Mary. She'll usually have her arm out. Why? Because this is the constellation Virgo, right? Virgo, the Virgin. So you learn the distinctive features of these different constellations. Virgo has an extended arm. If you find a if you find a mythical character who's a virgin, a lot of times it's Virgo. So Persephone is a virgin, a maiden, who's being abducted, in this case, by Hades. He, in this case, is jumping in his chariot and with his 4 horses, and she's throwing her bouquet of flowers up in the air, and they're disappearing down into the underworld. That is how you can do this with all the stories in the Bible, all the myths around the world. And some, you guys may be thinking, maybe Dave just has an overactive imagination. But the distinctive features, like the two-pronged spear, the character with that deep knee bend, the texts themselves, the ancient Greek myths or the biblical scriptures themselves will include these references that point to specific constellations if you start to understand the vocabulary. So it's like they're speaking another language. It's just like Mr. Miyagi with, I think I've talked about it in previous Grimerica visits. Wax on, wax off. It doesn't just mean wax on, wax off. It means something else. It's pointing to something in the heavens, and it has a spiritual meaning. So I'll shut up and let that sink in just for a minute, or let you guys ask questions, because I just gave you a huge burst of unpacking one myth, and we'll start going around the world and seeing how it connects. But is any of that?
So is that myth representing a real Hercules and this star sort of mythological thing, or do you think that it's actually just they're manifesting Hercules out of the stars?
Right. So I do not believe that Hercules represents a literal figure who was then turned into myth, or that there was a literal Samson. Samson from the Bible. Yeah. What was he known for? Also great strength. I don't believe they have to be literally true in order to tell us this profound message that they're trying to tell us. But some people will get very upset about that, particularly if you start going down the road of showing how the Bible is related to all the myths. But we can get into that. But all the stories of what Hercules does can be shown to match up to constellations. So the question is that just, is that coincidence, or did someone really do these things and then they, found stars in the sky to match up with them? I believe that the stories themselves are talking about the stars. They're portraying these heavenly cycles, which these cycles relate to our cycles, to our everything that we're experiencing is also in cycles. So that's a great question, though. We can dive into that some more as we go on more and more myths. As you see that they're more and more connected to the stars, I think it becomes harder and harder to say, well, someone named Hercules really lived in ancient Greece, because we're going to find in ancient India someone who does things almost exactly like Hercules.
Yeah. Yeah.
So did he live in Greece or did he live in India?
Yeah.
And then you can find it in New Zealand. There's a character in New Zealand who does things. Aotearoa. Did he live in New Zealand or Aotearoa? Did he live in Greece or did all? I believe this is a universal system that's around the world, that all these myths are descended. We can get into where they may have come from, but that's a great question. That's a good question, Graham. So let me finish up the story of Demeter and searching for her daughter. Remember, she came and she found this youth named Triptolemus. This is Demeter and Triptolemus. And because Triptolemus gave her the clue that helped her figure out how to get her daughter back, she rewarded Triptolemus by letting him travel around the world in this special chariot that she had with serpents. It was drawn by winged serpents. You can see it. This is an ancient Greek plate or pottery. And she gave him a jar full of seeds to go around the world and spread the seeds around the world. And she's carrying this long torch right here. You see that long torch?
Mm-hmm.
So I would argue that is the same part of the sky. Here's where we just were. Here's Hades. Here's Persephone. Here's her bouquet of flowers. Right underneath Virgo is this long constellation called Hydra, the serpent, and on its back is this little cup called Crater the Cup. And you can see all this in the night sky, not this time of year, but it's a very long constellation. It goes so far, it starts underneath Virgo and it even goes past. This is Leo. I didn't draw in the outline, but this is Leo. Leo's coming up right now in the east. In the morning, like at 5 a.m. If you go out at 5 a.m., you can just see Leo coming up. But Hydra stretches even past Leo. But on Hydra's back is this Crater, the cup, but it looks like a little wing. I would argue this is the chariot, the serpent chariot that Persephone's mother Demeter gave. And now this little bouquet of flowers is her torch. Is this making any sense? Whoops, I'll go back here. See, here's the ancient art. Here's the serpents. Here's the winged serpents. She gives her chariot to Triptolemus. She gives him a jar of seeds. She's carrying a torch. These things refer to specific things in the sky. And in fact, I would say that the pigs that fall down into the underworld, right here, there's this constellation Centaurus. And remember how I said the smoke?
Yellow one.
Yeah, the yellow one is Lupus the wolf. But this is Centaurus, the red figure right here. Centaurus, that's where Alpha Centauri, you've heard of like in Star Trek, sometimes they go to Alpha Centauri or whatever.
Yep.
Alpha Centauri means like the brightest star in the Centaur constellation. I would argue that it's a wolf, but the Greeks would sometimes depict it as a pig, and I'll show you why. This is one of the labors of Hercules. You can tell this is Hercules because he's got this huge club. He's almost always going to have his legs in some kind of one leg is going to be deeply forward. This back leg will often be in a lunge, but he's bringing this boar. He had to go get this wild boar and bring it to this cowardly king. This is the king that made Hercules do his 12 labors. I won't get too off track, but when he brings the boar, the king is so scared he goes and hides in a big jug. And Hercules brings him the boar and says, "Here's your boar," and throws it down into the jug. And there's the king in his jug. This is an ancient Greek piece of pottery. This is the figures are black. So this is a black figure. This is older. This is like 5th century BC, 6th century BC. Later on, they came up with a red figure, so everything is reversed. But here's another one. Same scene, different vase. Here's Hercules. Here's the boar. Here's the cowardly king in the jug. Now let's go back to Centaur. See how the Centaur is a human coming out of the body of a horse or something.
Oh, I was just going to mention that on the other one. It looked like he had horns there, like there was a...
Yes. So it could be a stag, right? Great call. We'll come back to that. You guys are on it. You're not saying you're listening really closely. Like, I'm not sure if you guys are going, is Dave crazy or not? Because you're not going, whoa.
No,
but
we're listening.
You're definitely tracking. So this looks like a person coming out of a horse, but it could also be a person hiding in a jug. See, this is the pig or the boar that Hercules throws down onto the cowardly king hiding in a jug. So in one part of the 12 labors of Hercules, the king, what happened was Hercules would go on these wild fits. He accidentally killed his brother or his brother-in-law while he was in this insane fit of rage. And so the gods said, okay, Hercules, or Heracles, in ancient Greece, he was called Heracles. In Rome, he was called Hercules. Because of that, you have to do some community service. We're going to make you talk to, what are you guys doing?
We're laughing about what happened to Hercules.
Oh yeah. So he's got to serve this king. This king is like the worst, like most cowardly, most mean-spirited king who was always jealous of Hercules. So this king is just super happy to put Hercules to work. And he just comes up with the tasks that he thinks will cause Hercules to be killed, like go slay the Hydra or go wrestle this lion with your bare hands. So anyway, that's in one episode when Hercules brings the boar whose bristles are like made out of bronze and he'll like gore you with his tusks. The king is so scared he hides in this jug, and I would argue that is right there. So that's the pig that Triptolemus saw his pigs go down into the underworld. That's how he was able to give the clue to Demeter as to what happened to her daughter Persephone. Well, we see pigs rushing down into a river in the Bible. We see pigs rushing down towards Alpha Centauri or Centaur in the story of Hercules. That right there is a wolf. If the constellation is called the wolf, but apparently the ancient Greeks or this ancient system sometimes dressed up that wolf in the form, it played the role of a pig. And then Ptolemy later got the serpent chariot drawn by winged serpents, given to him by Demeter. Here's her torch. Is this making... Wings. Yeah. So you can see it. I mean, it's like, what, really? But the more I became obsessed with understanding this system after reading Hamlet's Mill. We could get into kind of how I came to this. But the authors of Hamlet's Mill knew something was going on between the myths and the stars, but they didn't have it all worked out. They only had it worked out in a few little cases. Like they worked out when Samson uses a jawbone, they figured out which constellation was that. But some of these are very hard to see, and they're actually very hard to see unless you have the right outlines of the constellations. We can talk about that a little later too.
Well, so not only that, it's like all the different, they all had their own sort of, they had their own names for them too.
Right. Around the world, everyone's like, wait a minute, doesn't everyone have a different set of constellations? Yes. Well, then how are they all using the same system? I don't know. Maybe it's so ancient, it's like pre-Egypt, because in ancient Egypt, they've got the myths, the Osiris and Isis myth on the sides of the pyramid texts inside these pyramids from 2500 BC. Or in ancient Babylon, they have the Gilgamesh, the tablets from, scholars believe 2300, 2100 BC. And they're already using this system in those. The Gilgamesh is using this system. The Osiris is using this system. So this system predates, it was already fully mature in ancient Egypt. So this is a system from, I think, a time like Göbekli Tepe ancient, like so ancient to the Egyptians. Göbekli Tepe to dynastic Egypt was as far in front of dynastic Egypt as dynastic Egypt is far in front of us.
Yeah.
So think back how far dynastic Egypt was to us. Göbekli Tepe was that ancient to the dynastic Egypt. So this system, I believe, came from probably something way before, and now all the cultures on the earth have a memory of it. and they preserved it in different formats around the world. But then something happened. Somebody got the idea that, hey, wait a minute, let's take the Bible and say that this is literal and not celestial, and we have to go around to all the other systems and tell them, you're wrong. Stop believing what you're believing and believe what we believe. And it's obviously a huge tragedy because they're all actually remembering the same system. But it got turned into this weapon to divide people instead of, this is actually all the same system around the world. I've chosen some myths from other cultures to show you that this same system is in action. We can see it around the world. That's why my books are like, I mean, you said they're like a phone book or something. Like my most recent one, Star Myths of the Bible, that's not my most recent, but the most recent so far I've got 3 in the Star Myths series. Star Myths of the Bible is 766 pages. And Star Myths of Ancient Greece, Volume 2, is all about ancient Greece. It's something like 600 or 630 pages or something, because there's just you could do this. You could write 10 volumes on, the myths of ancient India, or 100 volumes, or even just 100 volumes on the book of Genesis alone. So.
Yeah, plus we're all connected, right?
Like Star Myths of the World here too, which is another like 480.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's Volume 1. Yeah.
Volume 1, yeah.
So they keep getting better even after that one. I'll send you another one.
But we are all connected, right? I mean, and we all have access I believe we have access to some higher information, whether it's the Akashic records or whatever. I mean, inventors invent things at the same time. Things happen in tandem as well. So could be just that they were even more connected back then, and all these different cultures were picking up on the same thing.
That's right. I think what they're doing is what you're talking about, like these profound techniques, like getting in touch with the Akashic record. It's not something that necessarily everyone on the street knows how to do, or lucid dreaming, or, out of body travel.
Yeah.
So it's like Mr. Miyagi has to teach Daniel-san. Mr. Miyagi knows karate. He knows it really deeply. He can do it in his sleep if he has to. Daniel-san, that's like a whole alien world to him. But Mr. Miyagi he knows that Daniel-san needs it. Daniel-san's in trouble. He's in the world. He's getting buffeted around by, Johnny and his buddies. So Mr. Miyagi has to reach out for something. How can I teach this invisible body of knowledge of karate to this kid who can't see what I can see? I know. How about paint the fence? How about wax the car? And so Daniel-san starts doing wax the car and paint the fence. He can understand that. And after a while, he goes, hey, Mr. Miyagi, man, I'm getting beat up here. When are you going to teach me some karate? All I'm doing is being your slave. And Mr. Miyagi says, and he shows him those motions that you thought were just wax the car are connected to this whole invisible system that you didn't even know you were learning. That's what I think they're doing with these stars. These myths. You're like, oh, yeah, myth about Persephone. Oh, yeah, I used to love that one when I was a little kid. Oh, yeah, well, did you know it was about Hades abducting Persephone? That's kind of horrible. Oh, yeah, well, the teacher never really kind of explained that part, about that he was like taking her to be his wife. I didn't really, we didn't get into that. Well, it's about the invisible world. It's about like the invisible kung fu that Mr. Miyagi knows about, that the ancients know about. They're like, hey, there's a whole invisible realm and you can get in touch with it. But it's not easy for you to understand because you've been plunged down in this physical body and all you can really think about is physical. So let me find something that connects you to the infinite realm. What can I use? Wax the car? No. How about the infinite heavens? Because when you're looking into the sky, you are looking into the infinite realm. It is infinite. So I'm going to use that infinite realm to teach you about the invisible realm, the realm of the gods, the realm of spirit, all those things that they're real, but you might not even believe in them right now because you're caught up in the body. That's what I think is kind of going on here.
Nobody ever even sees the stars anymore.
Yeah.
Like I was thinking, we think we have it bad here, and we're in Canada, which is probably one of the least densely populated countries in the world. So it's got to be tough. Like there's got to be kids in parts of the States that have literally never, you grow up your whole life without seeing the stars.
Yeah. So
like California's got to be really
like
tough.
you see them one here, one there, but you don't get away from the light pollution.
Yeah, like
really.
California's got to be brutal.
Yeah.
Yeah, so where I live actually is pretty sparsely populated, so I can get up into the ridge line of mountains that separates me from the ocean. It's only like a 20-minute drive. It takes me like 30 minutes to get to the ocean, and I can see just breathtaking. Like when you climb out of your car and
It's like,
there's nothing, and it's like it takes your breath away.
Yeah.
But yes, that experience is so important, and there is light pollution that. I don't know that it's malignant to disconnect us from the stars, but it's definitely disconnecting us from the stars. So if you're able to get at least, you can go to the mountains and go out and see the stars. But this system of outlining the constellations we can talk about will really enable you to have a lot more success when you're out stargazing, and also a lot more success in linking them up with the myths.
Yeah.
And actually, I may have mentioned it before. I have to get out of to jump ahead. I'd have to, let's see, and show. Let me just go to like slide 80 or whatever. We're not going to obviously get through all of these, but if we go to this guy,
the book.
there's my book covers. This is who came up with this system or rediscovered this system. You recognize that author? I put a clue.
Is that, I don't know who that is. No, but that's Curious George, I think, right?
Yeah, so that's right. So H.A. Rey and his wife Margaret wrote the Curious George stories and illustrated them.
Huh.
And he also wrote this book, The Stars, A New Way to See Them, where he says, the way that they're outlining the constellations is terrible. Doesn't really help you find the constellations in the night sky at all. It's really useless. I'm really frustrated, but I'm an illustrator. I love to make illustrations. I'm going to show you a better way to connect the stars. Well, I don't know if H.A. Rey was connected to some ancient tradition or if he was just inspired by the gods or something, but his outlines match up with those ancient Greek pottery vases. His outlines match up with the ancient Egyptian iconography. His outlines match up with carvings in like Sumatra. So the way he shows you to outline the constellations will help you to A, find them in night sky, find them in the night sky, but B, match them up with the myths and artwork. So here's a comparison. This is a little bit small, but if you go to like Wikipedia and look up some of these constellations, you might get some just horrendous depictions of the constellations. I just picked 4 and showed this is how you'll see them still today, even on apps and stuff on your cell phone. Can you see that at all?
Yeah.
Yep.
And then down here is the exact same stars with a different set of outlines. So the red in this one corresponds to the same constellation. This is H.A. Rey's outline. So this is a charioteer. This is Perseus, who rescues, you guys know, Andromeda. He's the one who fights the Medusa.
Right.
Anyway.
I should have studied up on my Greek myths.
Man, come on, guys. No, I'm just kidding. This stuff has been, it's like we learn it as kids, but we don't think that it has any application to us as adults, but it's profound. These myths, it's like they've got all the answers. I don't have the answers. The myths have the answers. And but you got to understand their language in order to understand what they're saying, or it's better to understand their language in order to be able to hear what they're saying. Actually, it's really small, but right under this foot of Perseus, that's the Pleiades right there. You can always find Perseus from the Pleiades, and you can always find the Pleiades from the foot of Perseus. See how
so you were actually watching Perseus rise.
Perseus rose before the Pleiades, I guess, right?
He's rising a little bit before the Pleiades, but what happens is this is how he looks when he's in the middle of the sky.
Right,
when he's over here in the east, he's actually lying down, so his head will be pointing to the left.
Oh, right, because they twist as well. Yeah, okay.
They rise, they go across the sky in an arc, like a rainbow, just like the sun does. The sun, rises over here, and we're looking south right here because you and I are in the northern hemisphere. For the listeners in the southern hemisphere, they'll be looking to the north to see the zodiac. Perseus is not exactly in the zodiac, but this is Taurus right underneath. Anyway, this isn't the best image to show you all the constellations. This is just a good image to show you how terrible the conventional outlines is. That's a whale. You're going to be able to remember that and find that as a whale in the night sky?
Okay.
No. That's how H.A. Ray outlines it. Yes, it's a whale. That's the southern fish. Doesn't look like anything in this depiction. Looks like you wouldn't even be able to. That's the southern fish. It's got this super bright star in its mouth. Okay.
Is that for Pisces then?
Pisces is actually. This is the great square of Pegasus, and Pisces is on either side. This is Pisces right here. This isn't the best place to show it, this particular slide, but Pisces is nearby. This star is actually brighter than any of the stars in Pisces. But this is kind of the wet region of the sky. We've got a whale. We've got we've got the southern fish. We've got Pisces over here. Right above the southern fish is Aquarius, who's a water bearer. He pours out water. He's pouring the water right towards the southern fish. I'll show you that a little bit later. But this super bright star in the mouth of the fish is actually called Fomalhaut. It's a mouthful of a name, but it means mouth of the fish in Arabic. And there's a biblical miracle where Jesus is going somewhere with his disciples, and a tax collector or a soldier says, "Hold on, don't your disciples, do they pay the tax or not?" And Jesus says, "No." Does the child of the king pay the tax? A rhetorical question, but then the answer should be no, shouldn't have to. But then he says, just so that we can obey the laws, Peter, go down to the seaside there and pull out the fish, first fish you catch, and take the coin out of its mouth, and you can pay the tax with that. And sure enough, he does. And that's the coin in the mouth of the fish right there. I mean, it shows up in different aspects in different stories around the world. I could show you a picture of that one, but I'm kind of jumping. I'll tend to jump, into myth after myth after myth if we're not careful, and your listeners will be like, wait a minute, you're kind of losing me there. So let me show you one more with Hercules, because, no, let me show you this one.
Hercules, the brother killer. They don't tell you that part.
Brother-in-law killer. Yeah, that's the not suitable for children part. So
Hercules
it's like we get introduced.
Son of a bitch.
we get introduced to these things, and we're like, I love them as a child. But then sometimes we go back to them as an adult, and we're like, well, they're just bizarre, and they're off-putting. They're like, wait a minute, he did what? He slept with who? What? That's what. It's because they're connected to the stars. When we understand that they're connected to the stars, then they all make perfect sense. It's like, wait a minute, that's a clue. I have to figure out which constellation has those characteristics. Let me show you another example. So this is a goddess from ancient Greece. I'm sticking with ancient Greece here. Do you know which goddess has a bow in ancient Greece?
Aphrodite? No.
Close.
The war
Starts
one.
with the same letter. Yeah. No, well, you're thinking of Athena.
That's
Athena. She carries a spear. So your other listeners are probably yelling at their screen right now with the answer. But this is Artemis. Artemis.
Right. Jeez.
It becomes
Artemis.
In Roman mythology, it's Diana. So if you meet anyone named Diane or Diana, she's named after the same goddess, Artemis. And she is holding this bow, and she's slaying this unfortunate youth named Actaeon. The story is that Actaeon he's a hunter. He got finished with a hard day of hunting, and he went for a nice wander around in the woods. He wanted to just relax, but unfortunately he stumbled into a secluded little grotto where there was a a pool, a river-fed pool, and Artemis was bathing in the pool with her nymphs. And it was bad for him because he saw her bathing. And the nymphs tried to get in front, shield the goddess with her body so that the goddess would not be seen by the mortal. But too late. Artemis, very severe goddess. She doesn't put up with crossing boundaries. She's very strict on protecting virtue and particularly women. She's particularly a protector of women. So she splashes water on Actaeon and says, go ahead and see if you can tell anyone that you saw the goddess Artemis bathing. And as she splashes water on him, he sprouts horns from his head and turns into a stag. And he tries to speak, and he can't because a stag can't really talk. He can only make this kind of choking, bleating sound, a bleat like a sheep or a deer. And all of a sudden, his hounds pick up the scent of this big buck, and they come roaring along, and they start tearing him to pieces. And he finds he can't even tell them. He tries to talk to his dogs, but of course, they no longer listen to their master's voice, and he's torn to shreds.
Wow.
So this, yeah, nice.
That's a
this
rough
artist,
afternoon.
yeah, this artist has depicted, and that's the end of Actaeon. This artist has depicted Actaeon in the act of being torn apart by his hounds. He didn't choose to put the horns on his head. Other artists put the horns coming out of his head or have him turning into a stag, but this is actually an extremely artistic. This is very high quality art. I mean, look at the shapes, look at the action that's going on. This is red figure. So this is the early part of the 5th century BC. This is a more advanced technique than the black figure because this is like they had to paint around everything that they wanted to leave red. So it's harder. But this way they could put nicer lines on the drawing because everything in black they put on. The black is like the paint that they put on. So they leave what they want to be red untouched. And that way they can add more fine details. But it's harder to do. So anyway.
So what's in her bow? What's in her hand beside her bow? Is that another arrow, or is that some other
another
special?
Arrow.
Okay.
Yeah. Have you ever seen like those speed shooting guys that'll do like 10 arrows at once? They actually hold them in the same. She's showing like good hunting technique because she's got the arrow on the same side here. This is like how you do speed shooting.
Huh.
But she also has a quiver. This is kind of important. I don't know what this is, but there's a little plume there. The artist has put a little plume there.
Now look
quiver. Look at the shape of her body. Look at the length of her dress. Look at the angle of Actaeon's body. He's throwing one hand up in the air. Look at the tails of the dog. And now I'm going to show you the constellations. When I saw this, I was like, oh, wow. This matches right up with the constellation Sagittarius and Scorpio. Can you see that?
Not yet.
Oh yeah, that's the bow. That's the bow. That's Buddy's hand.
Oh,
Scorpio's the person
Oh,
getting
wow.
shot.
Actually, quite a bit, yeah.
Look at the angle of her body. Look
Yeah.
at the length of her dress.
Yeah.
Look at this plume. Look at this right here, this plume. Look at how she's holding the bow. Is she holding it up like full height to her eye, like this? No, she's holding it about like that. Let's go back to the stars. It's depicting it like that because that's the way it looks in the sky. This is the outlines of H.A. Rey. He doesn't actually put the multiple heads on Scorpio. I do that because a lot of times Scorpio is the Hydra. Look at this plume. This is a very distinctive part of Sagittarius. See that plume?
Yeah.
It's on the vase. You see the angle of her feet, the length of her dress. Now, Sagittarius will sometimes play a male figure, sometimes play a female figure. Artemis is actually a twin. She has a twin brother. Do you know who her twin brother might be? Also an archer, a god. Artemis and...
Hermes?
Good guess. Hermes does not use a bow, so this, very often.
I should know
Apollo.
this. Damn it.
Artemis and Apollo. So Artemis and Apollo, I believe, are played by the same constellation, Sagittarius. I'll stop putting you on the spot like that. Sorry.
No, it's all
I'm
good.
just trying to-
It's all
trying
good.
to
I used to love the Greek mythology as a kid, but I'm just kind
Here
of
they-
out of it.
Yeah. No, that's all right. I'm just trying to this by asking questions like that. It kind of helps audience stay awake.
No, it's fun. Yeah.
Look at the connection here. This is the black and white version of the same vase. There's Sagittarius. Look at the angle. The little curving tails of the dog could be either Corona Australis or the stinger of Scorpio, but the hands being thrown up in the air. When you see an angle like this and hands thrown up in the air, this is Scorpio and Sagittarius for sure, I would say. This is the full myth. Remember, somebody, I think it was Graham, said, oh yeah, it looks like centaur. It could look like a stag too, right? So this could be a man with a torso of a man and the body of a horse, like a centaur. Or if you remove this green line, right, imagine that green line is not there, then it's a stag. You see the horns?
Yeah, with some horns, yeah.
Nice wide rack. That's Actaeon turning into a stag. In this myth, she turns him into a stag, then he gets attacked by his own hounds.
Oh my God, yeah.
Oh, yeah, look at his little dog with his little ears.
Yeah, he's being attacked by his own hounds. Here's the stream where the goddess was bathing. This
The Milky Way.
The brightest part of the Milky Way is right between Sagittarius and Scorpio, okay? And Sagittarius and Scorpio, brightest part of the Milky Way. This is also called the birth canal in like Maya, the Maya of Central America. The 2012 prophecy was all about this birth canal right here. John Major Jenkins, the late John Major Jenkins, he just passed away. Great researcher, talks about how this part of the Milky Way is a birth canal. Now, Artemis, she's a virgin goddess, but she always presides over childbirth. So anytime a child is born anywhere, Artemis is there. The goddess Artemis is there in the invisible realm. And this is the brightest part of the Milky Way with the birth canal in it. It's also the turning point of the year. We'll get to that in a minute. But that's why Artemis, she's a virgin goddess, but she presides over childbirth. And we'll talk about, because it's the virgin birth. It's the second birth. She's presiding over the spiritual birth. We'll get into that in just a second. But I just wanted to show, in this case, I believe the Scorpio is the nymphs. They're trying to shield Artemis with her body. And you might say, wait a minute, Scorpio is a bunch of nymphs? Yes, if you read my 700-page books, like the Greek myths, they use over and over, there'll be a goddess bathing in a pool with the nymphs or with graces, or it'll sometimes be a maiden. Anyway, just take my word for it. These are the nymphs trying to shield Artemis from being seen by Actaeon. And then she says, hey, I'm going to turn you into a stag and let your own dogs hunt you down. Okay, so we'll move along. This is me with that. That's how big it is.
Oh, wow.
So it's a pretty large, you can see this in Boston. This is in the Museum of Fine Art in Boston. It's been there since like the 1800s. I went there specifically to see this vase. I love that artwork so much. I had already written Star Myths Volume 2 when I went there. So Star Myths Volume 2, which is all about the Greek myths, had already been published when I got the opportunity to go to Boston and see this. This is a bell crater, it's called, because it's kind of bell-shaped, but very beautiful piece of artwork. But while I was there, I came across this other vase. I didn't even know this vase existed. But while I was wandering around in the Museum of Fine Art in Boston, which is a just fantastic museum, you could just spend 2 weeks in there and never run out of interesting things to see. Can you see what's going on? I want to quickly run through this one. Do you see this figure here?
Are
There's
those
a wrestling
boobs?
match. Yeah, those are pecs.
Oh, I see.
Those are big pecs on a serpent man. So
Is
this
that
guy's like
Polynesian? It almost looks Polynesian or something.
That's an interesting call. This is actually ancient Greece also, but this is a figure putting this guy in a headlock from behind. So you see the little skinnier arms?
Yeah.
This
I
the big
can
arms.
see him gripping his own arm there.
Yeah. He's doing a jujitsu move right there from behind. He's got one arm under this guy's arm.
Yeah.
He's got one arm around his neck, and this figure is Triton. Triton is like a man up down to his pecs, and then from here is like a mermaid. So you see this? And the guy who's wrestling him has his deep knee bend, and this leg is forward, partly obscured by Triton. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Or do
I can see it. Can you see it, Graham?
Yeah, I can see the deep knee bend and all. It's hard to see the hands, but now I see his hands wrapped around the pecs there.
The hands are really
Small.
Yeah, but
I'm
they're
gonna draw on it.
really outlined. Like you can really see the one hand grabbing his other wrist.
Oh, yeah, that's
Yeah,
what I was just
I'm
looking at, yeah.
I'm going to try and draw it in. Oh, wait.
No, that's pretty clear.
I'll just draw a little bit for you guys. This is the hands of the guy who's behind, right? This is the hands of the much bigger. He's wrestling with a god. This is the sea god Triton. This is his chest. This is his body. His
And then
body
he's
goes all the
turning
way
into
back.
that serpent.
Right. The sea serpent is all part of this guy.
So it's almost
So
like
he's-
the guy who's choking him out has like some feathers sticking up out of his hat there or something.
Yeah, he's got a quiver right here with arrows.
Oh, that's
He's
what that
got-
is. Yeah, okay.
This
yeah.
is his leg right here. He's got a lion pelt hanging down over his leg because he's wearing a lion skin. Do you know who that could be? He's got a lion headdress over his head. Anyway, in the interest of time, I'll tell you, this is Hercules again. Hercules slays the Nemean lion, and then he takes his pelt and puts it on. But see that deep knee bend?
Yeah.
Deep knee bend? Tracking with me?
What? Yeah,
Big
but
tail.
is the dragon eating him? Is that his mouth on the top there?
No. It's not a dragon. This is his tail. This is the flukes of his tail.
Oh, yeah,
so he's
okay,
he's like a mermaid.
Oh, I see
You
it
know,
now. Okay, yeah, I got it.
He's a mermaid, but he's a male. So that's his pecs. That's his big arms because he's a god. This is the god Triton, and he's being wrestled by Hercules or Heracles. And I'll tell you, the story is, just real quick, I know it's already, time is moving fast here, but Heracles, for one of his labors, had to go get the apples, these golden apples of the Hesperides. And to find out where they were, he had to go wrestle. He had to ask the sea god, Triton, or sometimes he's called Nereus, sometimes he's called Proteus. And the sea god won't tell him. So Heracles wrestles him. And while he's wrestling him, the sea god, Proteus or Triton, keeps changing his shape-shifting. Finally, Heracles just keeps holding on, and the god tells him, okay, here's how you go get to the apples of the Hesperides. Well, I will tell you that myth comes from the stars. There's Heracles or Hercules again in the sky. I'll move kind of fast. You can see the deep knee bend.
Yeah.
Hopefully big enough for your...
And bit forward again, so then that other guy's going to be tangled up in there.
Yeah, so he's tangled around. So who's he wrestling with? Well, right underneath Hercules in the sky, we already saw it. It's the same constellation that plays the god of the underworld, Ophiuchus. Ophiuchus means the serpent handler. Now, if you can look along the top edge of Ophiuchus, you see this up and down undulating pattern? I'm going to draw it in for you. That's the guy that he's wrestling. He's wrestling Triton.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
He's directly above. See this shape of the merman? He's a mermaid or a merman. He's got this is his fluked tail, like the flukes of a whale. You know?
That's like follow the white line almost, kind of.
Yes, there you go. That is referring us to the constellation Ophiuchus. You see that he's wearing a crown? Triton is wearing a crown?
Yeah.
Okay, let's go back to the stars. Hercules, Ophiuchus. Hercules is wrestling. He wrestles different constellations, but usually ones that are nearby him. Now he's wrestling Ophiuchus. So he's wrestling Ophiuchus. There's the crown. See, you might say, wait a minute, that shape, okay, I give you that it kind of looks like that man in the artwork, but aren't you reaching a little bit? No, because they put a crown in the picture, and there's the northern crown, Corona Borealis. You know, Corona the beer is named after Corona, a crown. There's the crown on that end. On the head end, this is the head of the serpent of Ophiuchus. Are you tracking?
Yep.
Now we need to find those big tail flukes. Well, in the Milky Way are two big birds, gigantic birds, Cygnus, the swan, and Aquila, the eagle. And I would argue that Aquila plays the role of those tail flukes, the tail of the serpent. So he's wrestling with Triton. The head of Triton on the crown, the tail of Triton with the flukes. Let's go back to the jar. There's the tail. There's the head with the crown. There's Hercules in his distinctive posture that matches up with stars.
Bent leg and the other one bent forward.
And the other leg in behind, like in behind there, the bent forward in behind.
Hercules,
you can see the foot coming
really
down,
see
right?
Yeah, and you can see this around the world. You can see this in ancient India. There's a god named Hanuman who is a monkey god. He has a square-shaped head with like a beard. It's usually a figure with a big beard, like Zeus or Thor, right? And you'll see them depicted in this posture in ancient artwork. So it matches up around the world. So this is where I get into what could they be talking about. And I believe it's talking about all the things that, you guys are interested in, or that you guys are seeking, and you're exploring these things. It's all in the myths. They're talking about there's an invisible realm. You're not just physical matter. These myths are actually about us. They're not just about some guy named Hercules or Heracles who went around and wrestled these things. When he's wrestling this thing that changes shape, that's like us wrestling. We go through all these different shapes in our own life. It's like, well, now you're shaped like this because you're an adult, and you were shaped like this. Or if you believe in reincarnation, it's like we're down here, we're like wrestling, and it's constantly changing its shape. That's what the wrestling that Hercules is doing is not just literal wrestling. It represents the soul's journey. That's what I'll show you. I'll switch over to my real quick, and let me know when we're getting close on time. But the stars themselves, are you seeing my constellations?
Yep. Oh, no constellations right now, just stars.
Stars, that's fine. The constellations are in there very faintly, but I haven't outlined them. I'm just going to show you the motion of the stars in the sky. Yeah. Just give you a little, instead of just still images.
Sucked into the underworld?
Yeah, that's what's happening. Good. See, Darren actually knows all the ancient wisdom.
Throwing the pigs down.
He's letting me explain it, but he already understands it all. So here we're looking to the south. So what direction will the sun rise from? The east, and it'll set in the west. There's the sun setting in the west. So I'm just going to move the stars along. I'll move them a little slower. Can you see the stars moving at all on your screen?
Yep.
All right. So what happens is, as we're rotating on our axis, the sky appears to be moving. Everything in the sky appears to be moving from the east to the west because we're rotating towards the east. That's why it's an hour ahead. You guys are an hour ahead of me because you're further east than me. On the East Coast, it's 3 hours ahead of us here in California. Here comes the sun coming up in right now it's constellation in Virgo, but it's rising in the east. It's sailing through the sky, the upper realm. But eventually, I'm going to just speed things up here. Whoops, going too fast. But eventually, there goes the sun. Whoa! It rises in the east. It courses across the sky. It sets in the west. I believe what it's doing is depicting our journey. Okay? And when it sinks down into the west, what do you think that represents?
Bedtime?
Bedtime, right? It's sailing through the. If it's life or death, do you think it's
death? It's in the underworld.
That's what you would think. You would think that it represents death because it's plunging down into the underworld. But I would argue that is representing plunging down into. And I got this from somebody else. A researcher named Alvin Boyd Kuhn argues. When the sun or the stars, look, right now you see where it is? It's above the horizon. It's traveling through the upper elements of air and fire. But now it's going to come into contact with the lower elements. It's going to sink down into earth and water. Like if I'm looking out into the west, I see the sun and the stars sink down into the lower elements of earth and water. That represents, or that may be used to represent, you've got a spiritual nature or a divine spark, but it gets plunged down into a physical body that's made of clay, right? A lot of myths like Adam and Eve are made out of clay, or Prometheus makes humanity out of clay, or Adam's made out of clay and then Eve is taken out of his side. That relates to a constellation as well. When we plunge, the fire is the spiritual part. So when they're coursing across the sky, that represents the spiritual realm, plunging down into, when we look off into the heavens, we're looking into the infinite realm. But right now, we're running around in a body. We're in the material realm. We've manifested out of the invisible realm and taken on a physical form for a time. But then, after we're done plowing through the physical realm, we're going to pop back up into the spiritual realm. Or, you see what I mean?
Yep.
Or am I losing
Nope.
the metaphor?
Is there any way to
metaphor,
draw those constellations in a little darker or highlight them at all?
Yeah, on the other computer. Sorry, not on this one.
Because I think I
no,
can see the
there's a couple
crown.
of them there.
That's going to be the flowers right up there, right?
That's
like
it,
straight
that's
up
right.
from your cursor.
That's right there. Can you see my cursor?
Yeah.
I don't know how
So
visible
that's
it
the
is to
flowers,
people
and
in-
then if you go over a couple of inches there, that's like the serpent again, right?
That's the serpent, right? So see, if you read that HA ray, then you'll start seeing this in the night sky. If
So can
start
you
going
flick
out-
from there to the picture you have that's outlined again?
Yeah, absolutely. So, oops. Take me just 1 second. I'm going to stop sharing that one, go over to sharing the PowerPoint. And we'll find it right.
It's funny how you can tell how they would have found the difference between planets and stars, right? They would have followed the stars all the way around, like that pattern, and then all of a sudden something.
Yeah, because the Bible
doesn't match
lays out,
that, right?
lays out the way that they go through the zodiacs, right? It's cool. Yeah,
That's right.
it is.
That's right. That's just what I was getting to is what does this all mean? So let me just continue forward, because Sagittarius, this gets to Darren's question of, is this about that part of the year? So let me just catch up. Here's the chakras, raising. This is like raising. We plunge down into this physical world, but we're supposed to be getting in touch with, wait a minute, you actually have a divine spark, or you are, what these stars are doing is explaining what you're going through. Okay. And this is the zodiac wheel. Has it popped up on your screen?
Yep.
That's the zodiac wheel. And I've put a line across the middle. Those are the two equinoxes with a red X. That's the crossing point for the two crossing points of the year, when hours of daylight in the upper half of this wheel, hours of daylight are longer than hours of nighttime or darkness. In the lower half of this wheel, hours of darkness are longer than hours of daylight. Well, we just crossed the September equinox. So here in the northern hemisphere, hours of darkness are now longer than hours of daylight. At the equinoxes, they're roughly equal, right?
Yeah, pretty close.
So this wheel, we're going clockwise. These are the zodiac signs. This is like from the 1500s, this wheel. But the zodiac signs tell us where we are on that wheel, because it's actually what it's reflecting is, and so the horizontal line is the equinoxes. This divides the upper half of the year when days are longer from the lower half of the year when days are shorter. This is the solstice lines. The winter solstice is the very shortest day of the year. The summer solstice up top, that's the longest day of the year. So that's in between these constellations in the myths. So the different constellations, they don't just tell us different parts of the year, they're telling us different parts of the soul's journey. The soul's journey from the upper realms down into the lower realms. We're crossing the lower crossing right now. We're plowing through. I think you just had a guest who was talking about water mythology, right?
No, that
Am I
was
wrong about that?
no, that was Greg at THC, I think.
Oh, yeah, sorry about that. Okay.
You son
Listen
of a
to-
bitch.
What? I thought you guys
No, it
were-
was
Just
fascinating.
kidding.
They're going through all the elements.
Grimerica shirt.
Really fascinating.
We're going through the lower realms right now. That's why
So
much
is that,
mythology.
does that tie into the Great Year?
Yes, it ties into the great year. That's the processional cycle. So so what happens is the great year is this whole thing is also shifting. So all these cycles, there's cycles within cycles. There's the cycle of the motion of the night. Like when I said, hey, what do you think that means? The stars going down.
Yeah.
Darren said, bedtime. Well, yeah, on the daily cycle, that's the hours of nighttime. But also the annual cycle, there's an annual cycle of the stars. There's stars that appear during certain parts of the year. And they're
Time to
moving.
harvest and
That's-
things like that.
Right. And then there's the lunar cycle is going on. And then we have even longer cycles. We have like the cycle of the moon going up and down across the it's rising and setting points. That's a Sothic cycle. That's even longer. That's like an 18-year cycle. And then we have like the cycles of Saturn, 30 years. And then the great year that you asked about, that's the processional cycle. That's 25,000, almost 26,000 years at the current rate. We could talk about what precession is, but that relates to 72. It moves 1 degree every 72 years. So that's why that number 72 is so important. And that number 72 shows up in the myth of Osiris and his brother Set. And it relates to the equinox. Darren asked if I could specifically talk about the equinox. So, but let me just, so there's all those cycles are used by the myths to talk about, to illustrate profound truths about our own experience in this, our own cycle of going through incarnations, or our own cycle of in this life. It's like we start off, we start off here. This is where we plunge over. Can you see my little arrow?
Yep.
It's at the 3 o'clock position. That's the September equinox, or the fall equinox. That's where we cross out of the upper half of the year and we plunge down into the lower half of the year. That represents like incarnation, the first birth. That's when we come into our body, and now we're like separated from the spiritual realm, but we keep plunging further and further down. But there comes a turning point at some point at the solstice. That's like that's the lowest point. Then things start moving back upwards. That represents the second birth. That's when we start getting in touch with, wait a minute, there's something more to just chasing around members of the opposite sex and getting into fights and being like dog eat dog world. There's actually, I've got a spiritual side, and you're supposed to start elevating that. Some mythical figures never really do. Like Samson, he's always just kind of like letting his passions run away with him. But if you read like the Bhagavad Gita, it talks about, well, why do we meditate? It's so that you get your horses under control and you let your higher self become the charioteer. And that turning point happens right down here at the darkest point, and that's right where Sagittarius is. This is Sagittarius on this diagram. That's right at Christmas. And that's why the goddess Artemis, who's a virgin goddess, presides over all birth, because she's the goddess of the second birth. She's slaying Actaeon because she's saying, look, don't just be, a hunter running around with your dogs, pursuing things like another member of the pack. You got to start waking up to your higher self. That's what I believe these myths are actually embodying. And once you start to learn what part of the cycle the myths are talking about, you can see the lessons that they're trying to tell you. It's caused by the earth going around the sun. That's why the sun rises in a different constellation. As we go around, that line is going to move through.
Oh, that's a good one there.
And that's why the days get shorter, because of this tilt. As we're tilted most away from the sun, the days are the shortest in the northern hemisphere. Obviously, the southern pole is tilted most towards the sun. So these crossing points, anyway, I won't get too into this diagram, but that's showing what's going on in the heavens. But those cycles, I believe this ancient culture, whatever ancient predecessors to all of us, used these cycles to teach these profound spiritual truths and matched them up with myths. And all around the world, we still have echoes of those. And in many traditional cultures, they still understand what they mean, I think. But what happened was it got turned into literal. Wait a minute, no, Samson is a real literal person. And if you say that he was just a constellation, I'm going to have to, burn you at the stake, because that's heresy.
Through institutionalized religion, it got turned into a literal translation, really.
Right. And maybe it wasn't, I think if that ancient civilization in Göbekli Tepe time was wiped out by some sort of catastrophe, like Robert Schoch and Graham Hancock are talking about, whether it was a comet or a solar flare, then maybe the system itself was only dimly remembered by some remnants that went underground. And so they taught the system as best they could, but over time, maybe people just forgot it, or some people stamped it out. They wanted to keep it to themselves, like karate or kung fu. It's like Mr. Miyagi. If you wanted to take over the village, you wouldn't want Mr. Miyagi going around and teaching people how to defend themselves. So you would say, hold on. Those teachings are only about waxing the car. They are not about anything that you can do to elevate your spirit and become more, get in touch with the invisible world and have out-of-body experiences or shamanic. All the religions, all the scriptures and myths of the world are actually
Oh, you're breaking up there a sec.
Hello?
You back?
I'm still here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're back. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
So what about these old cultures like Göbekli Tepe, and they even, how the Moais on Easter Island were buried quite a ways. So would studying this type of thing give them a hint of some upcoming disaster? Like, I wonder if that was part of how they knew to like cover everything up before the end of the Ice Age, really.
That's a great question. I think that these myths, so we've got this archaeological evidence around the world that people like Robert Schoch and John Anthony West and Graham Hancock and many, many others are exploring. Carmen Butler.
Check out all our past episodes.
Yeah, Patricia Alyan and all these people are looking at the physical archaeological evidence and saying, look at this. Culture of high sophistication, spiritually, obviously very sophisticated. Or look at the temples and pyramids in Central America. Look at these alignments. Look at this. It's doing something. What's it doing? I can't quite tell. Teotihuacan, Tiwanaku. I believe that the myths are also like an additional body of evidence that speaks to something very ancient, very spiritually sophisticated, and wherever its remnants are, great spiritually sophisticated. Like, look at how many people from European cultures have been turning, in the last 100 years towards, I need to go to India and study the Vedas, or I want to tap into the Native American tradition because it's so much more spiritually speaks to me. That's because in some places, this ancient wisdom didn't get stamped out to the same degree that I think it got stamped out. Like, it got stamped out in Europe, like deliberately stamped out, when literalist Christianity went around and started saying, no, this is the only way you can understand this. So anyway.
Well, and it's still being stamped out by science too. I mean, it didn't stop. It's still, there's still a boycott against ancient spiritual traditions in a lot of ways.
That's right. Maybe when they said, look, people aren't believing the literal Bible story anymore, we've got to use something else. Okay. Yeah. Look, whatever you do, just don't admit there's a spirit realm.
Yeah, exactly. There's nothing greater.
But to your earlier question, I think this, in conjunction with, this is yet another like archaeological remnant. The myths of the world are pointing to the same facts that Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson and Robert Schoch, who are going around and looking at the archaeological and saying, look, ancient knowledge somehow being preserved. The myths are also another example of that like they work together.
So would that give them would there be, if you're studying the precession and the stars and the constellations and all this stuff way back when, like 12, 15,000 years ago, you think would there be something, would you be able to see something happening and track it and maybe know that, like what if they could track that cometary impact, like every spring and fall, like these guys are surmising that there's the, what was the Taurid meteor shower?
Taurid meteor
shower. Like what if
right.
they were watching all this and that plays into this myth somehow, and they could actually see that it's coming closer and closer, and that like in a couple years or a couple 100 years or whatever, like we're going to get hit.
Yeah.
I don't know.
That is definitely possible. That's not what I'm really investigating, because that's almost like a literal, that's like saying, well, they're making this myth because of something that's literally happening with comets. I believe that what they're using these myths for is to talk about the spirit world. Look, the gods are real, okay? But they are hard for us to understand because they're dwelling in the invisible realm. But there is a force or a power in that invisible realm that corresponds to Zeus, or that corresponds to the god of the underworld. And his characteristics are the same around the world. And so you need to understand this aspect of this god or this goddess, because you're going to need to integrate those. You're going to need to become attuned to that spirit world in order to continue to elevate, like elevating the chakras. But in order to do the things that you're supposed to be doing here in the world, you're supposed to be becoming attuned to the spiritual world. So like I talk about, like Odysseus in the Odyssey, he is a great example of someone who's able to listen to the gods. Athena is the one who's usually helping him, but she helps him. He has to do the work. She's telling him, hey, when you get to this island, here's what's going to happen. Make sure you do this. Make sure you don't do this. But he's the one who has to do it. So it's like the invisible realm. You've got to listen to it, but you've got to, it's like we're supposed to be manifesting, or they do the work through us, or the things that we're supposed to be doing. Maybe getting a little, it's hard to, sometimes I have a hard time.
It's hard to articulate.
Yeah, it's easier for me to really write it, but it's like they're acting. Okay, it's like this. All right, let me jump ahead, because I know we're running close on time, but it's like, wait.
Ooh, there's my squatty potty.
Yeah.
Is that the real squatty potty?
I don't know. I just put it in there.
I just thought
it is
squatty
the squatty
potty.
potty.
Yeah.
Yeah. This isn't an ad for squatty potty.
I was going to throw a commercial in there. We're like almost at the end. Let me.
That's awesome.
Hold on. How do I get out of this? Darn. How do I get to? I was at this really esoteric idea. Okay.
And just for people that know that if you're short, you can get a 9-inch squatty potty.
Well, I was going to throw that joke in there because it's like we're in this physical body. Like all the stuff that's funny is about our physical body. It's like we're in this physical body, and it's kind of funny because we're actually both spiritual and physical. But when we really want to put someone down, or we really want to, if you think of most of the curse words and swear words, they have to do with a physical body. Like, oh, you asshole, or whatever.
It's trying next Tuesday. Yeah.
It's like reducing someone to just their physical form. That's what racism is, or sexism. That's cursing. That's lowering someone to just their body. And what the ancient myths are about is we're actually supposed to be getting in touch with our higher self and elevating. And we're supposed to realize that every single person we meet, they're not just their body. They're actually an infinite person. They're an infinite soul in there. And if you just reduce them to the body, you're following the wrong path. And that's not what the ancient myths are talking about. We're supposed to be elevating. So this is from the Bhagavad Gita. But in the Bhagavad Gita, Arjun he's getting ready to go into this big battle, and he gets very cold feet, or he just doesn't want to participate. And he says, I'm just going to sit this one out. I don't care if they kill me. I can't go into this battle. And Krishna, who's a god, his divine charioteer, you can see he's holding the reins of the horses, says, hold on, Arjun, hold on. Let me drive out into the middle of the battlefield, and let me just explain something to you. You have to go into this battle. I believe the battle is this incarnate life. And Arjun is like, I don't want to go be in a body. And Krishna says, listen, you have to wrestle with it, like Hercules wrestling with Triton. You have to go through that cycle. And while you're there, you're supposed to do what's right without attachment. And the picture, it's the same constellations that we've been looking at all the way through. In the Bhagavad Gita, the banner that's over the chariot is this monkey god, Hanuman. Here's the divine charioteer, Krishna. Krishna is often playing a flute. They ride around in these chariots that are shaped like this. They actually have this kind of like canopy over them. Here's a picture of the Bhagavad Gita. So here's the divine charioteer, Krishna. Here's Arjun. Here's those canopy-shaped war chariots that they're always riding around in.
So would the wheels be like the serpent?
Yeah, I think actually, and they're just imagining the bottom of the cart are the wheels. These stars, I think, are the wheels.
Oh, so they don't do the correlation like Hercules does where they draw the snake out of that. Yeah.
No, yeah. So right now, the Ophiuchus is not playing the role of the snake. It's playing the role of this war cart. See? This is Ophiuchus, this whole thing. See how they have a roof over it? Just like
so that
Ophiuchus
flag is like the noose?
That flag is actually Hanuman. So it's hard to see, but there's a god. Sitting on top of the pole. Yeah, he has a long tail, and this god Hanuman carries a mace, which is a dead giveaway that it's Hercules again. So this Hercules is very big in the sky, but that's the monkey tail. Instead of being his leg, now it becomes the tail of the monkey. This is Hanuman with his mace. This is the god Hanuman on top of the war cart. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And here we have divine charioteer,
and the
Krishna.
Big Dipper is like the horses.
Right. And so that depiction is actually to teach us, there's other ancient Sanskrit writings like the Upanishads that say, listen, when you're meditating, what you're doing is you're getting the senses and the body under control, and even your mind will wander around when you're trying to meditate. And how do you get over that? You have to start getting in touch with the divine higher self. Krishna, he's the one who should be holding the reins. You see, Arjun here, he's a semi-divine hero. That's us. We're part mortal. We're part flesh. We're part spirit. But if you can give the reins over to your higher self or the God or the divine self, then that is how you get your mind and your senses under control. And the only way to do that is through disciplines like meditation or Tai Chi or yoga, or there's all kinds of them around the world. Shamanic practices, getting in touch with entheogens or psilocybin mushrooms. You are getting in touch with your higher self, or that's what those things are designed to do, or that's one of the things that they can do for you. Does that?
Yeah, that resonates. Yep.
So that.
So do you think that's like part of the program, or is that just kind of the way we've interpreted it into our spiritual culture?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think that you can see this kind of message like over and over it's like in the Native American traditions, you go out on a vision quest, or like you go out to
walkabout.
Yeah, like Crazy Horse. He saw a vision of a horse that was floating above the ground. He went on his vision quest, and that's how he got his name. He was getting in touch with his higher self. Nobody knows everything that he wouldn't say everything that happened to him when he had that vision, but he had to go out there and he had to fast, and he was like 13 years old, and he had that vision. And he's getting in touch with his higher self. I think every tradition has this teaching, but they might teach it in a slightly different way. Like in the story of the Bible, there's doubting Thomas, who has to put his finger in the wounds that Jesus has received. This is the lower self getting in touch with the higher self as well. This is let me know if we've only got like 2 minutes left, but the same.
No, you got like 10, 15.
Okay, right on. So Arjun has to get in touch with his higher self. He has to trust his higher self. He is doubting before the battle. Arjun is like a picture of doubt. He sits down on the ground and says, I think I'll just sit here. I don't want to get involved in this battle. And Krishna says, hey, you have to, but trust in me. You've got a divine charioteer. In the story of doubting Thomas, it's the same thing. Thomas, the risen Christ, has appeared to all the other disciples, but Thomas isn't there. And when they come to him, they say, hey, we saw the Lord has risen again. And Thomas says, no, I won't believe it until I put my finger in the wounds, until I feel his side and touch his hands. And when he comes to Jesus, Jesus doesn't say, oh, Thomas, you can't be my disciple because you didn't believe on faith. He says, no, come here and feel. And Thomas is actually called Didymus in the scriptures, which means the twin. And nowhere in the scriptures does it say who his twin is, but in some of the texts, the Gnostic scriptures that were not included in the Bible, Jesus calls Thomas my twin. Thomas and Jesus are twins, but one's the divine twin and one is the mortal twin or the doubting twin. So we have a doubting self. Like if you're always doubting in a basketball game or a hockey game, right before you take a shot on the goal, if you go, can I make that shot? I don't know. You'll never make it. You've got to get in touch with your higher self. It's like Daniel-san. Mr. Miyagi doesn't explain it to him. He just says, Daniel-san, do wax on, wax off, and boom, in comes the punch, and he just stops it. That's like one example of what it's like getting
in the zone.
Yeah, in the flow state.
In the zone. Yeah. And so your doubting self, we all have a doubting self. We all have a Thomas self. We probably know our Thomas self only too well. Is that bad? No, we have to have a doubting self. If I drive away from the house, this is an example I use, and I'm not sure if I turned off the burner when I made scrambled eggs in the morning, and I'm doubting, maybe I should go back and check because I might burn down the house. So it's like we have to have our lower self. We have to have a critical mind that learns mathematics or learns the angles of the shot. But later, after you've learned the angles of the shot, whether it's a three-point shot in basketball or a slap shot in hockey or whatever, I'm not a hockey player, but after you've learned those angles, or Mr. Miyagi, after you've learned those angles that he taught Daniel-san, then you've got to get to the point where you let the higher self take over. And if in the game you're still using your Thomas self, you're not going to make any shots. Or every time your Thomas self jumps in right before you take the shot and you doubt, you'll probably miss that shot. That's just an example from sports, but I think that's what these things are talking about. And it's not just sports. It's like getting in touch with your, the invisible realm, and even, shamanic drumming. You can get messages from your higher self or from the spirit world. Just like in the Odyssey, Odysseus is able to get messages from Athena or from Hermes. Hermes helps him out when he's in a jam and he's about to go face Circe, who turns everybody into animals. Hermes stops him on the way and says, hold on, Odysseus, you're about to mess up. Let me help you out. Here's what you need. And so it's like getting through life requires that. That's what I think they're saying. This is my interpretation.
Yeah, and it makes sense even over and above sports, like just socially, even just not doubting yourself in all kinds of different ways, not just art and sports, but, writing, speaking.
Right. Or writing music. I mean, how many artists say, oh, yeah, we wrote our best songs while we were smoking ganja or, the herb. What they're doing is there's all these techniques around the world. The techniques are countless. How to get in touch with your higher self. There are so many techniques. It could be breathing. It could be tantra. It could be yoga. It could be tai chi. It could be martial arts. It could be meditation. It could be all these different disciplines that are around the world. But I believe this is what they're talking about. And because we can match the stars up with the myths, then that helps to illuminate what part of that journey they're talking about, what part of the wheel they're talking about. So Thomas lines up with Capricorn. You may not be able to see it, but Thomas, the goat of Capricorn, is way down here. I moved my mouse. Sorry. Way down here at the bottom of the wheel. Sagittarius is right before the rebirth. Capricorn is right after, that lowest point. Okay?
Yeah.
The lowest point. Capricorn is right there. So you can't doubt. Doubting Thomas is like an illustration of, hey, once you start to realize the higher self, you get down to that lowest point, there's a turning point there. That's your second birth. That's where you're starting to get in touch with your higher self, your Christ within. In some of the, biblical, they talk about, it's not an external Christ, it's a higher self. It's your Christ within. But you can't turn back. Once you get there, you got to start to let go of some of those doubts. So anyway, let me show you how well this lines up. Look at, this is a Renaissance painting. These hand gestures, somebody understood this system in the Renaissance and in ancient artwork, because look at the hand gesture. See how Jesus is holding his hand downward and Thomas has his fingers pointing out right here.
He's always doing like the west side.
Yeah. Look at this. This is the goat. This is one hand is pointing his fingers and making the horns. One hand is pointing down and making Capricorn in the sky. When you learn to see it, is two triangles like this. This is how H.A. Ray outlines it. This is, if we could just zoom right in on, this is the outline of the goat. Actually, it goes all the way over here. I should erase that line. Here's the horns. Here's the first triangle. Jesus puts his head there. The second triangle is right here. Goes all the way up to here. Can you see that? And this woman right here, that's one of the two Marys, is making the tail of the goat right there. I'll go back. The goat has two triangles and a little bob tail. You see that?
Yep.
You see it on the green outline? Two triangles, a smaller one and a larger one, and a little bob tail. This Renaissance artist has put in, I'm going to make the pen color green, the horns of the goat, the first triangle, the second triangle right here, and the little bobtail right there. Can you see that? There's the horns. Thomas lines up with the goat. You see the horns?
Yep.
Horns over here, horns. These little hand gestures, like Leonardo da Vinci did this all the time in like the Last Supper. They line up with celestial constellations. All these different, these figures, he's telling you, this is not literal. This is the sun moving through the constellations. This is your higher self that you're supposed to be getting in touch with. This is about you. These myths are all true, but they're actually, you're the star of the myths. So this is Capricorn. There's the two triangles. Now it's in blue. Can you see that?
Yep.
He's looking towards the leg of Aquarius. Okay. This is that southern fish that we talked about before that Aquarius was on top of. Here's Pisces over here, Darren. You asked, is that southern fish? It's near Pisces, but it's not the same. In this Last Supper scene, Jesus lines up with Aquarius. That's why he goes around and bathes everybody's feet. Okay? He's Aquarius. He's doing the act of foot washing. When Thomas later on doubts that Jesus has risen, or that the risen Christ has risen, he has to put his hand in the side wound. You see this leg that Capricorn is looking right towards?
Yep.
Aquarius looks like he's running. You see this leg could also be envisioned as a spear going into his side, right?
Oh, and then that would be his other legs over there, yeah.
Yeah, so instead of being a leg, this could be a spear wound in the side, and Capricorn is looking right at it. That's why Thomas has to feel the spear wound in the side. And in all these ancient artwork, the triangles are present. Jesus will put his hand over him. There's the other, and there's the horns of the goat. He's got to point towards the side wound. Does that make sense?
Well, that's coming the other way now, though.
Yeah, so sometimes the artist will take artistic license and reverse it.
Flip it around.
But
so his finger's the horn.
Yes, his finger's the horn. Jesus puts his hand over his arm to make that. See, Jesus puts his fingers downward like that. Why? Because he's telling you, the artist is telling you, I know that this is Capricorn. That is his hand. Then they give you the bigger triangle with the elbow and a little bob tail. And here's a different, but we could go through hundreds of pictures of.
So they basically knew at the time that it was all allegory.
Somebody knew. I don't know if the artist knew. You know, in those days, to be an artist, you had to make it through all these levels. It was like becoming a kung fu master or something in art. And so they told you, this is how you depict Mary. This is how you depict the angel Gabriel. Always with these, you can use your artistic license, but you have to have these elements. I think that may have been going on to where the artist himself or herself might not have even known. The reason you're doing this is because it matches up with the stars, but somebody knew this system.
Yeah, it could be like a lot of these deep synchronicities lately through art and culture. It could just happen. There could be something bigger at work that we don't even understand.
We are down to about 5 minutes, so we should probably wrap it up.
Right on.
That's not bad.
Yes.
Like 2 hours and 15 minutes just fucking flew by.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm sorry if I didn't give you guys enough chance to ask questions. So here we are at the end with like 15 minutes to go. So you're throwing out some really good things, like maybe this is all synchronicity. I mean, maybe it is. It's from the gods. But are there like some questions, or from the spirit realm, if you're uncomfortable with the term the gods, or, you know, the myths call them different things in different cultures, but I think they're kind of talking about the same truths. But the truths are from the invisible realm, so they have to put some clothing on them so that we can see them. It's like if we had a convention of the invisible man and invisible women, and there's 20 invisible men and invisible women in the room with us, and we can't see them, we'd be like, hey, can you put on some clothes so we could see the outline? That's what I think the myths are doing. They're showing us, we can't see the invisible realm, but they can show it to us by putting clothing on it. And the clothing they put on it is the stories. And we're not supposed to stop at the clothing. We're supposed to start to understand the invisible realm that's underneath. And that can have like profound impact on our lives. So I'll stop talking because I've been going, I feel bad that I haven't let you guys get too many words in edgewise. Although when you did ask questions, they were like right on target. So since we've got some time, like what stuff isn't clear or is a little confusing? It's kind of whirlwind.
Well, I know. I mean, we could have, jumped in and asked questions. We just wanted to let you get that, all your stuff out. I mean, I think it's important to touch on what you're going to be up to next for the next little while. I mean, we've got a pretty big book here, and you've come up with another couple copies. I mean, I think we should give you a chance to talk about what's next for you.
Yeah, right on.
Hey,
So,
Darren, or do you have anything, Darren?
No, that's good. I mean, I definitely want people to go to check out the books and to check out your the Mathisen Corollary blogger page there. We'll definitely link to that in the
so
show
much
notes because
content
everything's there, and it's a lot easier to digest when you can kind of read it and look at the pictures and all that stuff. But it's pretty great stuff.
But this has been really mind-opening for me compared to doing it audio only, because some of those things, especially the chariot one, there's a couple there, or the lady with the bow, like that was really just looks like it's right from the constellation. That's pretty cool.
Right. I was really excited to do one that's visual. So you guys are the first ones who's ever actually managed to make it happen with visual.
Nice.
And I was really excited because I think you can really see it, and it really is visual. So I'm actually going to be doing some classes where people can sign up. The first one is actually this Saturday. So people who are listening live, I'm doing one just on the Bible. It's a 3-hour web conference. That's $36 to do that. But, it'd be like a college class just like this, but all on the Bible with, drawing the diagrams and things. But if you don't want to do that, you can also go to my blog, which is free. And there's almost 1,000 entries now, and you can search through them. I've got a couple dozen videos that I've made. I'm not a cinematographer, so my videos are, my best effort to try and show this stuff. And then I've got, as you were mentioning, all these books. So The Undying Stars is actually from 2014, and I was just starting to understand all the connections to the stars. But in this one, I really kind of try and lay out the big picture. And this is still one of my most popular books, The Undying Stars. But after that came the series of Star Myths of the World. Volume 1 is kind of staying at a pretty easy level of the constellations, and it bounces around from one culture to the next, so it doesn't get that deep. Volume 2 is where I go deep into one culture. This is just the myths from ancient Greece. I still like Volume 1. It talks about the myths of ancient India, some Native American myths, and we can do some of those maybe on a future show if you want, or myths from the Pacific, like the Maui myths. But as I go along, I get more, the explanations get a little more in depth, and the constellations become a little more challenging. And also, as I'm going along, I'm learning more about the system. So Volume 2 gets into even more depth because it's just going into one tradition, the Greek tradition, and going as deep as I can. It gets into the Iliad, the Odyssey. And then Volume 3 is all about the Bible. And then my most recent book, it just came out earlier this year, 2017, is Astrotheology for Life. And it's trying to get deeper into how this applies to our life. Kind of like I was trying to bring that in.
Kind of replace the religion that you just uprooted?
I didn't uproot the religion.
Well, no, but you know what I mean?
Somebody uprooted this religion.
It almost comes along well like that, because if people are, taking the Bible literally, and they can read all your other books, and they're like, fuck. And then they're like, boom, Astrotheology for Life. I'm okay again.
So I really was taking the Bible literally before I started getting fascinated.
Because it's got to be tough, right, to find out that it was just a story.
Changes everything for your whole paradigm, your whole world. So The Undying Stars was the first book where I was trying to where I had been wrestling with coming to grips with this evidence, because to me, the evidence is really overwhelming. I could overlook, okay, well, that one thing kind of looks like that, and maybe that matches up with the Bible, but we didn't go deep into some of the ones from the Bible because of time, but it really did throw me for a loop. So I had to, and the synthesis that I am presenting here is coming from other researchers and things that are said by, other cultures. I believe that if you look at the cultures that were the least disturbed for the longest, what they're saying is probably closest to what this system is trying to teach, like ancient India or Native Americans or
Egypt,
the Far East.
Yeah.
Places, yeah, Egypt, places where the Roman Empire didn't get to, basically. I think the Roman Empire was basically the one that ended up starting to stamp this stuff out, starting in Europe. Like, my ancestors that come from Norway, they didn't, in ancient times, Norway was Norse myths, right? So this got imposed on that part of Europe. It all got imposed on Europe, but now it jumped from Europe and started trying to impose itself all around the rest of the world. But if you go to the places where it didn't get stamped, like it got stamped out in Europe so early, there's less of it went underground. But there still is with the Druidic, some of the Celtic is tied into this. But if you go to the places that were left alone by the Roman Empire for longer, I think that's where you can get closer to what maybe they're trying to say. So I've had to try and understand what it could mean. I could be wrong. So I always say, go to the myths yourself.
Yeah,
I found
check it out.
I found enough evidence that this is what they're saying. So learn the language and then go check it out for yourself and see if you think they're saying what I think they're saying. I'm not the spokesman for the myths. The myths are. So go to them. And but if you're speaking their language, then you have a much better chance of understanding what they're trying to tell you.
Yeah.
And everyone could use to spend a little bit more time looking at the stars. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, we are up on it. We are out of time. So big thanks to Dave for coming back on the show, for being our first real video presentation, and for wearing the shirt too. That worked out perfectly.
Hey, thanks a lot, guys. I guess you guys are doing a Grimerica right now.
We are.
Yeah, we'll be out here till midnight. So, no, that's great. And we will stay in touch, because I definitely want to get into a little bit more practical stuff where we can do this every couple of months, kind of talk about maybe if there is a myth that's in play that month, and what to look for that month. We can maybe do it, look to do it at the beginning of the month and kind of give people an outlook for what to look for.
That'd be great. Yeah. Thanks for suggesting that. I look forward to skies over Grimerica.
That's right. That's right. And Grandma C said him for you, too.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot, guys. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks,
Okay,
David.
Dave.
Take care.
Bye for now.
Okay.
All right.
That was our chat with David W. Mathisen.
We don't have to do the outro now, do we?
Yeah,
Okay.
just keep going.
Oh,
Just
yeah?
keep going. Yeah, big thanks to Dave for coming on the show. We're going to shut down the YouTube feed.